Over 90% of Gaza's population now survives on humanitarian aid alone. This wasn't random, it was a chain reaction, decades in the making. So, why does Gaza never escape war? The turning point that sealed this cycle isn't where most people expect. By the end, you will see how every ceasefire was built to collapse. It starts with what Gaza has already become. More than 90% of Gaza's population now depends on humanitarian aid for daily survival. That is not a temporary spike. It is the new baseline, confirmed by UNRWA's 2025 flash appeal. Food parcels, clean water, and medical supplies arrive from outside because almost nothing inside Gaza can meet the demand. Hospitals run on donated fuel, schools double as shelters. Even bread, the most basic staple, relies on flour shipments from abroad. The numbers are stark. Out of roughly 2.3 million people, over 2 million receive aid just to get through the week. In the last year alone, 926 buildings, including homes, clinics, and schools, also were completely demolished. That figure comes from satellite-verified counts, not rough estimates. Every demolished structure means another family without shelter, another layer of dependency on tents, aid rations, and outside support. The aid system itself is stretched to breaking. UNRWA warns that without urgent funding, core services, healthcare, education, even basic sanitation are at risk of collapse. The pipeline of assistance is now Gaza's lifeline, but it is also a pressure point, and every interruption, every funding shortfall sends shockwaves through the population. This is not a temporary emergency. It is a structural condition, rooted in years of blockade, repeated wars, and the destruction of infrastructure. The question is no longer how much aid is needed, but whether the system holding Gaza together can even survive the next crisis. Behind the numbers lies a deeper problem. The physical foundations of Gaza, its homes, water networks, power lines, are crumbling faster than they can be rebuilt. The humanitarian system is not just a safety net. It is the only thing standing between Gaza and total collapse. What happens when the infrastructure itself gives way? Electricity in Gaza rarely lasts more than 6 hours a day. When the power cuts out, refrigerators stop, water pumps go silent, and families gather around battery-powered lanterns. The blackout is not just a technical problem, it defines daily life. UNRWA's latest situation report confirms that even outside of major offensives, the grid cannot keep up. Fuel shortages and damaged lines mean hospitals must ration care and students try to study by candlelight. Youth unemployment in Gaza hovers around 50%. For young adults, finishing school does not open doors. The job market has collapsed under the weight of repeated wars, border closures, and an economy starved of raw materials. Even those with professional degrees often find themselves waiting in line for aid distributions or working informal jobs just to survive. A young resident puts it this way: "Every morning I check if there is electricity before I think about breakfast. My brother has a university degree, but he has never had a real job. We spend our days looking for work or queuing for supplies. At night we talk about leaving, but there is nowhere to go." These numbers, less than 6 hours of power, half of youth out of work, are not just statistics. They shape every decision, every hope, every frustration. The consequences ripple out: interrupted medical care, stunted education, stalled businesses. Gaza's young people grow up knowing that scarcity is not an exception, but the rule. The question is, how did a place with so much human potential end up so systematically deprived? The roots of this scarcity run deeper than any single blockade or airstrike. After the 1949 armistice, Egypt took direct control of Gaza, but the territory was never annexed. Instead, Egyptian military orders governed daily life. Gazans were denied Egyptian citizenship and left in a legal limbo, residents in a territory that belonged to no state. Egyptian martial law shaped every aspect of administration. Civilian courts were replaced by military tribunals. Political parties were banned. Movement in and out of Gaza required special permits, and curfews could be imposed at any time. In theory, the All-Palestine government, set up with Egyptian backing in 1948, was meant to represent the Palestinian population. In reality, it collapsed within months, leaving a vacuum that Egypt filled with its own appointed commissioners. There was no elected council, no independent civil service, and no plan for economic development. Refugee camps expanded, but there was no move toward citizenship or permanent integration. The result was a fragmented society, governed by emergency decrees rather than institutions. For nearly 2 decades, Gaza's people lived under foreign rule, stateless, and with no clear path to self-determination. This political void set the stage for the next upheaval, a new occupying power, and another abrupt transformation of daily life. At dawn on June 5, 1967, Israeli forces launched a sweeping military campaign across the region. Within days, the Gaza Strip fell under Israeli control, ending nearly 2 decades of Egyptian military rule. The change was immediate and total. Egyptian officers withdrew, and the Israeli Defense Forces installed a new military administration to govern every aspect of daily life. Civil affairs, security, and land use all came under the authority of Israeli commanders reporting to the Ministry of Defense. Permits, curfews, and checkpoints replaced the old order. This was not annexation. Gaza remained outside Israel's official borders, yet every border crossing, airspace corridor, and maritime zone was now controlled by the Israeli Defense Forces. The population, already swollen by refugees, found itself under a new system of occupation, with no path to citizenship or self-rule. Israeli military orders dictated everything from school curricula to the movement of goods. The handover in 1967 created a direct line of external control that would last for nearly 4 decades. The Israeli occupation set the stage for new patterns of resistance, settlement, and negotiation, each one shaping the ground rules for what came next. The legacy of that 6-day war still defines Gaza's relationship with the outside world, and the question of who truly governs the Strip remains unresolved. In August 2005, Israel carried out a full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Nearly 8,000 settlers were evacuated, their homes and communities dismantled under the Disengagement Plan implementation law. The Israeli military pulled back, but control over Gaza's airspace, coastline, and most border crossings remained firmly in Israeli hands. Overnight, the territory shifted from occupation to a new kind of isolation, externally controlled, but internally uncertain. The following year, Gaza's political landscape changed again. On January 25, 2006, Hamas won a landslide victory in the Palestinian legislative elections, securing 74 out of 132 seats. The result stunned the region. International donors froze direct aid, and the Palestinian Authority, dominated by Fatah, found itself sidelined in Gaza. Tensions between Fatah and Hamas escalated from bitter rivalry to open conflict. By June 2007, after days of street battles, Hamas expelled Fatah forces and seized full control of Gaza. The split was now total. Hamas governed Gaza, Fatah held the West Bank. Israel and Egypt, citing security fears, locked down the borders. The blockade tightened, and movement in and out of Gaza slowed to a trickle. What began as a pullout had produced a territory cut off on all sides, governed by a party shunned by much of the world, and locked in a new phase of demographic and economic pressure. The consequences of this fracture would define daily life in Gaza for years to come, setting the stage for the next crisis. Gaza holds more than 5,200 people per square kilometer, one of the highest densities on Earth. Every new building destroyed, every closed crossing squeezes the population tighter. In this confined space, the logic of conflict changes. Israeli security doctrine is built around overwhelming deterrence, rapid, forceful action meant to prevent attacks before they start. Yet the reality on the ground is different. Militants in Gaza, facing a much stronger military, turn to asymmetric tactics, short-range rockets, tunnel networks, and hit-and-hide operations. Most rockets travel just 10 to 20 kilometers, barely crossing the border, but each launch draws a massive response. The resulting airstrikes and incursions ripple through crowded neighborhoods, multiplying civilian harm and fueling outrage. This cycle doesn't happen in isolation. Iran channels cash and weapons to Hamas, helping to replenish arsenals after every round of fighting. Qatar sends billions in reconstruction funding, some of which is diverted to pay salaries or rebuild tunnels. Egypt controls the Rafah crossing, sometimes opening for aid, sometimes tightening the flow in response to regional politics. Each patron has its own motives, strategic, ideological, or economic, but the effect is the same. Fresh resources arrive, just as the last ceasefire phrase. As these outside actors reinforce both the humanitarian system and the military capabilities inside Gaza, the territory becomes a pressure cooker. Every attempt at deterrence, every blockade or bombardment triggers new adaptations. The denser the population, the higher the risk that any military operation will spark the next crisis. The question that remains is this: in a place this crowded and this closely watched, can any outside intervention ever truly break the cycle, or does each new escalation only tighten the loop? Gaza's cycle isn't just history, it's a system, reinforced by every blockade, airstrike, and failed negotiation. As regional and global powers recalibrate, escalation remains more likely than resolution. Each decision made today sets the terms for tomorrow's crisis. The next turning point is already in motion. Share your perspective below.